Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. Before I get into this video, I would like to ask you all to please leave a like or comment on my video and consider subscribing to my channel. Now I am going through with the gameplay from Bubblegum Burst and Host today. They are currently in the process of getting the shards that you have to destroy with the darkness weapon. So before we get to anything further, this video will be on the next part of the story following Destiny. Now, I basically explained Destiny 1 in the last video, and this will be explaining Destiny 2. So, Destiny 2 starts with the assault by the Cabal. The Cabal Red Legion has arrived in our solar system and have pushed straight towards Earth to take the last city. Now, when they arrive with a legion and they start attacking the tower, and a massive battle ensues. We fly as fast as possible. We fly as fast as possible to the city, and at that point, we end up actually getting a lot of combat in that situation. So we fight through as the Cabal are really raging through the city and they're causing a lot of damage. Now, as they keep going, a lot of fighting happens, and we end up fighting all the way to their main command ship. And as we reach the main command ship, we stop the command ship and something weird happens. They start to erect a cage around the traveler. And as it locks on and finally locks the traveler within its cage, the light is cut off from us. And as the light is cut off from us, our powers fade. And once we lose our powers, we become really weak in comparison to what we were. At this point here is where everybody's story really begins, because Dominus Ghoul, the leader of the Red Legion, walks out of his ship and kicks our ghost off the ship, and then he hits us off the ship as well. At this point, we both fall down into the city and it is under Cabal control. In our weakened state, without the ability to use the light, we cannot be resurrected. However, the ghost can simply heal us when it comes to his powers. That is the extent of his ability. We cannot resurrect at all. So we end up taking a long trip out of the city, several days long, before we reach other survivors. And these are regular civilians, not guardians, who are fleeing from the city towards other safe havens that are out there. At this point, we end up joining not Commander Sloan, sorry. I'm forgetting her name. Commander Hathorn, or Hathorn at the time, and we end up joining her on the farm. Now, at the farm, she's regrouping people and getting them armed and ready to fight back against the Cabal. Now, we then go on several missions and we end up retaining our light by touching a shard of the Traveler. And that is where we once more retain our powers, we get powerful again, and we are the only Guardian with light at that time in the system. We then follow and track a signal, and we hear that Zavala has called us out to Titan to reform up and form up a counter assault to take back the city. It is at this point that we end up going towards Titan, and on Titan we find out that the Hive are already there. Since the Guardians don't have light, and all those who arrived on Titan, many of them had died to the Hive, sorry, not the Fallen, along with the Fallen being there as well. So we rush in and we start going through Titan, and we actually end up saving the day, giving them a foothold on Titan. At this point, we end up going through and restarting the power generators, restoring functionality to Titan. We then go in deeper into their research ecology and retrieve their supercomputer mind. At this time, we realize that the Cabal have actually set up a weapon directly against the sun called the Almighty. And at this point, what is his name? At this point, Zavala asks us to go and find his fire team. That's Ikora, Ray, and Cade 6. So the first place we go is where we last knew Cade 6 to be, and that is all the way back to a centaur called Nessus. Now we end up on the centaur called Nessus, and we end up being communicated to by this weird AI called Failsafe. She ends up leading us to Cade 6, who ends up getting trapped in a Vex simulation loop because he was being rather reckless. We end up freeing him from the loop, and we tell him that Zavala needs him, and that Zavala needs his fire team. He ends up going back and he gives us the location for Ikora Ray, being Io, one of the moons around one of the planets in our system. So we end up going to Io. At that point, we reach Io and we find that Ikora Ray is there, and we explain the whole situation to her. Before long, we are told that we need to stop the Cabal from whatever they are doing, trying to drill out the light from Io, because it's the last place the Traveler had touched. We end up following them and finding out that their plan is actually to extract light. Now, we were wondering what in the world their plan was, and while we were at it, we also found out that there's a bunker linked to Rasputin on the planet, one of the Warmind bunkers, and when we activate it, we find out that the Almighty is linked directly into our sun. So if we destroy the Almighty, we also destroy the sun regardless. So we decide to go back into the missions, and we end up going towards, sorry, this is a little bit difficult to remember off my head. We end up going back to the farm with Zavala, Ikora, and Cade, and we get together making a plan. Now the plan is threefold. We first take a Cabal base, we get a hold of one of their ships, we arrive on the Almighty, we disable the Almighty, and then we return back to Earth to actually take on Dominus School so that we can defeat him without having to worry about them destroying our solar system. Everything in the first part of the plan goes according to plan, and when we finally reach back, it turns out that Zavala, Cade, and Ikora, without their light, were unable to reach Dominus School. So they leave the last part of the mission up to us. We enter into the ship and we end up following after Dominus School. At this point, we find out that he is extracting light directly from the Traveler, and he empowers himself with the power of light. So he has the same powers that we have, and he is using it against us. We end up defeating him, and in his last moment of death, he becomes a giant figure of light energy. He is beyond our power to stop, and at this moment, the Traveler wakes up and destroys him. So that is when the Traveler awakes and releases that pulse of energy that reaches the black ships out in the middle of empty space. So that is when the darkness awakens and comes towards us. Now, moving on from this, things happen and proceed as follows towards the next season. The next season would have been the Warmind, where we end up going to Mars and we run into Anna Bray, who is a legend who was believed dead in the Battle of Twilight Gap, one of the battles for the last city with the Fallen. We end up following her and find out that she is after the Warmind Rasputin because of her old link to the Bray family. So she goes for it, she opens up everything, and we end up doing a whole lot of missions to wake up Rasputin. Now, once we go there and we start this whole story up, we find out that Rasputin buried himself with a very dangerous threat, one of the worm gods from the hive. So we end up fighting it and destroying it, and in the end, we end up reawakening Rasputin, who starts launching a new set of defense networks to get himself ready for the next incursion. So we move on from this point, moving towards the next DLC called the Infinite Forest, or basically the Osiris DLC. So we end up going in and we fight. Sorry, what was it I was about to say? Sorry. We end up going into the Infinite Forest to try and save Osiris. And when we end up saving Osiris, we end up going through a number of tasks to actually get him out of the Infinite Forest using his ghost Sagira, who has possessed our ghost temporarily so that she can help us through. Eventually, she finally separates from our ghost and becomes her own separate entity. At this point, we end up going to the next set of stories when we actually defeat the Infinite Forest's mind called Panoptes, and once it has been destroyed, we remove the ability for the Vex to reach the future they wanted. Now at this point, we have the Forsaken DLC which comes out. This is where Verix abandons his duties in the Prison of Elders in hopes of saving his race. His race, the Elixni, is really dying out at the moment due to all of the things they have done and the lack of power they currently have. We follow through with following after the Elixni. We end up going to the prison of elders to help stop the riot formed by Verix in the last moments to get the house out. And at this point, we end up losing Cade 6. During this riot that happens inside, a whole lot of incidents happens, and he goes to catch these very dangerous criminals that he put away with Petra Venge, called the Scorn Barons and the Crow. Now, the Crow is actually Aldrin Sov. So what happens was he was actually corrupted by Riven, the last Ahamkara of the Awoken people, and sorry what this does is it makes him insane to the point where he starts doing weird things. He pollutes the ether so that the Scorn don't need servitors to actually have ether, allowing them to grow very large for Fallen. So they end up doing this, improving their powers, getting new powers, and that's how the Scorn were born. And that's what happens during Forsaken. We hunt the Scorn down through the reef basically, and then we end up going into the city of sorry, the city of the Awoken, called the Dreaming City, where we end up killing the last Ahamkara. However, this was a setup by Savathun to actually help us outgrow in power. So we end up triggering off an endless cycle of curses that keeps going for months and months on end, and we're trying to find a way to stop it. Now, as we go through with the story and we fight against everything, we kill the last Amkara, we trigger off a cycle of a curse that keeps repeating in a 3 week cycle. And it's like a forever lasting loop in the city. No matter how many times we defeat them, they keep repeating that exact same loop of incidents. And eventually, we finally find out that there might be a way to stop it by reaching a certain amount of power. We attempt it and we find out that it was just a trick from Savathun. Now, moving on from the Forsaken DLC, we are introduced to um, someone called the Drifter. He introduces us to a game called Gambit. Now, my incident reports on the side are going to be a little bit inconsistent because I still have left out a lot of story from this entire section of the game. So we end up finding the Drifter and we end up taking part in his game called Gambit. If I'm correct, before him came the Black Armory, where we find out about one of the survivors from the collapse, who is an EXO called Ada 1, part of 3 families who formed another weapon making cult called the Black Armory. It's at this point that we find out that the Fallen are up to something again, trying to use her technology to become even more powerful. And then we finally go and we stop them, resulting in us finding out exactly what happened to the Black Armory during the collapse. This is just a little sneak peek of what's coming out with Destiny's next DLC, the what's this thing? Lightfall, as it is currently called. So we currently go through all of that. We find out about what the darkness enemies were, how they sound, what they do, and that's when we first find out about what the pure darkness enemies are like. Now we come out from that there, and the next mission which comes up is Shadowkeep. Now I didn't personally take part in Shadowkeep, but I have seen a lot of what happened in Shadowkeep. So in Shadowkeep, we find that Savathun and the darkness are work. No, sorry, the darkness is working on something. Savathun had tricked one of the last daughters of Oryx into trying something to awaken the darkness on the moon. And we then find out that there's a pyramid ship, the darkness, on the moon that has been hiding there for an unknown amount of time. We enter it, it gives us a message. It's very, very scary. And this is when we discover that the darkness is approaching. Following this, there's several seasons where we end up helping restore the war mind. We end up taking on several other tasks in relation to the Drifter. Now, the Drifter becomes even more important when he introduces a new season of his work, basically to help us understand what's coming with the darkness using the Nine. Now, the Nine are a paracausal entity as well. They aren't as powerful as the light and the darkness, but they are slightly beyond us. They might just be cosmic and not paracausal. We're not 100% sure on them. So nonetheless, the Nine give us a whole lot of messages and tell us exactly what's coming, and that the light and dark are just powers that we could use to our benefit. Now, moving on from that, there is the Menagerie, which is by Emperor Callus. Now, Emperor Callus arrived the same time that we defeated the Red Legion. He did a number of things. We did a number of raids helping him secure his ship, and he basically gave us a whole lot of messages regarding the darkness. Now, when Emperor Callus gave us all of these messages, we had to take it with a pinch of salt because he has a habit of lying to make himself seem greater. So we end up doing a number of tasks for him. We end up messing with one of the items that was used by Savathun to corrupt one of his great bathers, and we end up completing a whole lot of tasks for him. So that is one of the missions and one of the side quests, and we go through all of this, learning exactly what happened to him and what he knows about the darkness and the light. From this, we end up going on to the season of arrivals, where Rasputin is setting up a new set of defenses that is meant for him to stop an imminent threat, that is, the darkness and the Almighty from crashing into the earth. Several weeks before the end of the season of arrivals, we end up destroying the Almighty. And then came the next season, which was the season of arrivals, where the darkness starts arriving. And as it arrives, we get this weird messages from Eris Morn, who is leading us through to understand exactly what's going on with the darkness. So we end up finding pieces of the old silver tree, and we plant a seed from it that grows into a tree that gives us messages on Io. Now, with all of that, we end up getting an artifact that leads us into our current DLC and where we are right now. So that is the basic story of Destiny. I've made it as compressed as possible. If you want a more detailed story, My Name is Bife has about 6 hours worth of storytelling covering everything in very good detail. So thank you all for watching. Have a good day.